Monday morning, so good to me. That's 5 seconds. That's all we got.
Well,
Public
right.
domain.
Right.
It's
Well,
not public domain.
And we'll get sued or copyright something.
That's
something.
right. It'll be relevant later.
In case you haven't figured it out, you're tuning into the Crash Chords podcast. Welcome back to another week. We do have an announcement.
We have an announcement?
The day we're recording is Steve's birthday. Happy birthday, Steve!
Hey!
You're older now.
Monday.
Although by the time it
No,
goes
you're going
up,
over.
it'll be
No,
after
they're
your
gonna-
birthday, so it'll be belated.
They're gonna come out find us and they're gonna break our kneecaps. Isn't that what the...
But can I just repeat the 5 second segment over and over? I can't go beyond that in any one session, correct?
I don't know. Details are
You were the one who
fuzzy.
told me about that 5
No,
seconds.
it is. It's true. I don't remember the exact
No, I think
detail.
that was for food that drops on the ground. That's the 5 second rule. Or is that the 3 second rule?
Semantics.
They cross over. They're what, cross pollination? Is that the word? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Why not?
No, he's right.
From these rules. You know, there's a hierarchy. There's a
Of
whole
course,
upper
it's like the
echelon of
shotgun
people
rules.
that really make these
You know,
rules.
shotgun in the car?
Yeah,
There are
everybody
rules.
knows shotgun in the car.
If
And
you
yes,
break
there
them,
are rules.
if you break them, they're coming after you.
Who's they?
Them.
Them.
Who's them?
You know,
Those them.
Those. There?
Well, if you watch the 1950, I want to say 55, 56 movie Them or They. Actually, there's both a movie Them and They. Giant killer ants. In
Yes,
that
I
case,
remember those.
That's them. They're the ones making the rules.
So wait, them is giant killer ants?
Ants, yes.
I feel like we've delved into a South Park episode.
This was long before South Park was even an idea.
That's
Yeah,
very
but
true.
I feel like we've delved into one now.
You just want to use the word delve.
It's not a bad word.
It's
It's
also
on my
true.
calendar.
as words go.
The only other news as far as this week goes is I started finally playing the new Zelda game, and I've exposed both Steve and John to some of the orchestrated music from it, and it's quite fantastic.
The choose save file music is actually quite exhilarating, and I'm not making this up. It's actually really good.
It's just the save file music. Yeah, that was pretty entertaining. I gotta say. Well, to be honest, whenever you take anything that's usually in a very, very different medium, and then you just let's make it the orchestra now. That it's usually pretty intense.
Yeah.
Like there's no way it can be anything else but intense. Sometimes it can be tacky, but this was not tacky.
Yeah.
So you know.
Well-
It takes a good arranger. That's where there's something we rarely ever talk about: arranging and orchestration. Usually, we just talk about composition, but there's a lot to be said about arrangers.
We also haven't done most of the stuff they've done that could talk about arrangement. The arrangement wasn't something so phenomenal that we needed to discuss
So
it.
that's the thing about arranging music is a lot of times you can get very, very lazy with that job. It's very easy to be like, oh yeah, I didn't quite get the composition job that I wanted, so I'll just use my talents toward reinventing existing work, which is not to put down arrangers. It's just saying don't feel bad.
Don't be that guy.
Don't
do
it.
it.
Don't be that guy. Exactly.
Don't do it. So, Steve, why don't you introduce us to this monstrosity? And I use it in both negative and positive terms that you brought us this week.
Yes, my pick for this week. All right, well, monstrosity crosses over into several things. First of all, the title of their band. The, as in Thee, the Silver Mount Zion Memorial Orchestra. Also formerly known as a Silver Mount Zion, for people that like brevity. And for people that really, really don't, the Silver Mount Zion Memorial Orchestra and Tra-La-La Band with choir. Actually, Tra-La-La Band, and then there's another iteration of the band that includes the choir. And I think it's somewhere in there they were also the Silver Mount Reveries. So yeah, they've had a lot of names. And they've had a lot of albums. They've been around since 1999. They generally fall under the category of post-rock, although other people would just rather call them experimental because it's easier.
Well, because experimental's a fairly large umbrella you can sweep things under.
It is a large umbrella, but sometimes it is just it's more appropriate.
And I remember seeing
categorization purposes.
seeing one person explaining the band, calling them post something something, and actually asked me to fill in my own blanks for this band. Yeah, I think experimental might be the way to go.
And that long
usually is the-
title wasn't even the album name. What the album name was...
Fuck off, get free, we pour light on everything.
Yeah.
Fuck off, get free, we pour light on everything. This is the album. It's pretty new, only last month.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing about this band. I got into them sometime in college. I owe my roommate for getting me into this band as well. Pretty interesting stuff. It was very new to me at the time, and I have to say their older work from the early 2000s really, really grew on me. It was the kind of thing that I think very easily can deter certain people who aren't used to a lot of noise in their music. That's another thing they could fall under noise rock, which is a whole separate thing unto itself. Because they do like their distortion, and also the manner of singing that the vocalist has is sort of an instrument unto itself in the fact that he really winds his way through all the lyrics. But I still think in many cases it fits the emotion of the track. But you know, these are very long tracks. They frequently get up to 11 minutes, 14 minutes. They've had... But almost every album has a long track.
But
if
also
not all of them.
on the same record we have songs that are 2 and 4 minutes long.
That's
which
true.
is unique.
Which serves
Usually,
nice interludes.
they're either all fairly long tracks or all fairly short tracks.
Or you just get an evergreen thrown into the mix of the
Right,
monstrosities.
but this definitely kind of goes to far left and right field.
Yeah. Well, I guess we have to, in order... this is not the type of band that I could sit here and try to describe what they're about before really describing the music in question. So I say we start off with the almost self-titled track, Fuck Off, Get Free, for the Island of Montreal. Which fittingly begins with this cute little girl saying, "We live on the island called Montreal, and we make a lot of noise because we love each other." Which is kind of sweet. For noise rock.
Yeah.
Ensue the noise rock. Right there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when this album started, I really didn't know where it was going to go. I hadn't looked at the track names. In fact, when I just saved it to my Spotify, because I have the paid version of Spotify, so you can do that on your phone, I saved it to my phone, and saw there were only 6 tracks, and I went, oh, is this the wrong album? I actually searched the page several times on the phone, because you can't see everything.
No, that's also very common for them.
Yeah.
Short, not many tracks, but very long tracks.
See, this is also a question I have that we can jump into another time, but what defines something as an album? Length of time? Number of tracks? Both?
Well, it derives from the LP long play. In other words, yes, it should have... It stems from the amount of time that would have originally filled up both sides of a 33 RPM record.
So essentially the runtime. The full runtime over a certain amount would imply that it's a...
Yeah, in general, it's between 45 to an hour and 15 minutes. Anywhere in that range.
It's funny, though, because there are albums that we've covered that are a half hour that were also considered albums.
I think it's more about what you want to pitch it as.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I think it's more marketing than anything else.
EPs tend to be B-sides. They tend to be things that are not formed. It's not like a full album concept.
Not
it's
always,
more about...
though. Some EPs are just a short section of tracks, but not enough to make a full
that's
record.
the case where you have like just one single track that you consider to be sort of an epic unto itself, but you know that's not really like, you're not going to be giving people an album's worth. You're going to basically be giving people one piece, one work. So then you treat that as a self-contained EP.
That's fair. That makes sense.
I think my best example of that is The Tane by the Decemberists, which, again, it's many songs within itself, but it's a whole giant piece, but it counted under an EP.
And back on topic...
No, I liked that. I liked that aside. I'm very glad he went in that direction. Give Matt props.
Matt, you have been given props.
Gee, what should I do with them?
Props
Can I spend them? Are they a currency?
We'll see if we accrue enough of them for you to do that.
That's fair. I do need to earn enough points.
Track 1.
So,
Fuck Off, Get Free. I enjoy immensely this introduction to the hypnotizing sound we're going to get into this album, and the way they interplay other instruments on top of this. The fierce currents they throw on top of their steady riffed guitar and drum beat.
Well, again, that's very typical of the whole post-rock feel, using the guitar as... This kind of goes back to our Sigur Rós conversation back in episode 60. Post-rock, we discussed it back then, tends to use the guitar more as an ambient effect than as your typical, shredding solo-type guitar. It's all about effect work here. It's about creating a type of an ambiance that's going
There's
to...
definitely a
sit
mood
in for
creation
while.
here. It's not necessarily super strong emotions in every point, but they're definitely trying to create a certain kind of mood, a certain kind of feeling in the air.
Melancholy is one of the closer emotions I could really attribute to.
Definitely a lot of melancholy in their
what this
work.
song's doing. But it's very unsettling. That's
Yeah.
a major component, and
We did hit almost Paper Chase territory in certain parts, for sure.
And that is, I think, really present in the way that horns get used, the way that the violins get used, the way that the more punctuated guitar work does.
Even the drum builds definitely help shape
I
that.
think
It
it has
takes
to
this
do more...
melancholy-
We're all on different sides with this, but I think I attribute it more to the vocalist himself and that whine that he has. He's not... It's singing a little bit off-key. More to the point where his phrases taper off just a little bit, and he sort of throws in a little bit of an accent there. It's almost spoken word. At the same time, there is a definable melody, but I think that's what is a little bit offsetting about it, is his singing style. Other than that, maybe the only other thing would be the distortion. But this first track I still thought was fairly straightforward. It had a definable melody. You can't really say it's that experimental when you have a definable melody.
It does have definable sections as well.
Yeah.
It does have a progression to what it's doing musically. Something you can follow along with and actually move through emotions. Because while melancholy seems to be a very permeating idea here, you do get a lot of that what I called earlier the fierce current of the other instruments. Does raise the emotion in sections to bring it up a little bit more, especially in the as Steve is explaining them to me, the A and B primes, the reprisal kind of ideas that they do with these sections.
That's the thing, because form-wise, again, when you're working across a massive span of was this track about 11 minutes? Or
Yeah.
it was
a
up
little
there.
shorter.
A little bit. Shorter than a couple of others later, yes. But I actually think this is something they do fairly well. I think they've mastered it over the 15 years they've been around now. They like giving you a whole story that lasts for a while. They want to immerse you in a certain environment. So when you're talking about form, when you're talking about dividing this between sections, I think they're not so far off here that they're constantly moving you from phase to phase to phase. They want to keep it fairly straightforward. So the A section here, which is the primary melody, it states itself. You have a little bit of distortion in the background. At some points it recedes, and then it comes back again, this time a little bit more frantic. There's more instruments layered in. You get a deeper exploration of the same exact section. That's what John meant when I said the A prime, for instance. Re-exploring the primary section, advancing it. And then you only really have, I think, one more section in this that I'd consider a B, and then a B prime, where they just further that again.
Well, I will definitely say that this band, as far as bands we've listened to, at least on the podcast, this is not the most disjointed we've listened to. There is a lot more. There is clutter, but I don't think it's chaos.
It's deceptive. That's the thing.
It is. Well, there's a dissonance that's created, especially towards the end of this track, in the B section that we're getting into, that really kind of sells this kind of organized clutter that they're going for.
I think that's a section where they really feel like they're going more Floydian, where you're getting a little more towards that 70s kind of psychedelic, and that was that part with those...
In the first track, there is a lot of hints of psychedelic rock. I will definitely
So that's another thing I
with that.
get just from his voice alone. You can go down that route.
Totally.
But it's those high... I didn't know how else to put it, but to say they were like high emergency guitar strums. It was just...
Well, yeah, I got a sense...
repetitive.
They are really
siren.
high strung. No pun intended.
But they have that whining but repetitive nature of like an EMT vehicle, or something to that effect, and it does create that same sort of apprehension of like you getting pulled over.
But that's
It's one way to put it, yeah.
But that's what I was saying. Like when I was listening to this, I actually thought for a moment when he was singing the high whine with the way the guitars were going, very much reminded me of parts of Os Mutantes. I got a sense of that psychedelic rock just in that moment. It wasn't very long, but it was just a very kind of when it came together, very much was reminiscent of what we had done.
I
subconsciously linked my last pick to this one. Interesting.
Yeah, but
and I want to speak to his vocal work too, because the line that gets repeated, not ad nauseum, because that sounds bad, but very often, and is distorted, and yes, does get treated like an instrument. And this is speaking to something you said earlier, Steve. Hold me under burning water, never let me surface. And we're not sure still if
let's make it known that we had trouble locating the lyrics for this album, and the distortion in his voice is so difficult to hear through. Even when we sat focused and the instruments had cut out at one point and it's just him singing, we still weren't sure what he was saying.
And
could
even
be
that's not
burning
till
water.
the very, very end of the song. That's essentially the outro or the B prime, where you're just continuing the same heavy bass dirge that begins. So we're a little all over the place here. But I do want to say one thing generally about this type of sound, that I do consider it a fairly mature sound. I think it's the kind of thing that, this is speaking directly to what you said earlier, Matt, that it is a little bit deceptive.
Yes.
That it seems as if there's less connection here than there really is. There is, it's very tied together within both song and to some extent album, but I think it takes a little bit more of a trained ear for their work.
Yeah,
it's the kind of thing I know immediately. I could pinpoint a lot of people, personal friends of mine, who would listen to this and be immediately deterred.
Well,
distortion alone would do that.
Well, yeah, well, that's just it. The distortion is almost like a whitewash across the entire record.
Agreed.
It's a long whitewash across the entire record that if you can't see past, it's very easy to get lost in it.
Yes.
And very easy to ignore the quality that is underneath it, because there is something there. And at points in the album, it blends really well with the clutter that's going on, but there are other moments where it becomes so loud and overpowering that you really can't concentrate on the other stuff.
That was my own experience with this. Even though I picked this album, I usually have no idea what to expect from Silver Mount Zion, but then this album actually falls kind of under what they typically do and what they've been doing for the past 15 years. So, yeah, I had pretty much the same exact experience. There are parts where it's really hard to grapple with the distortion.
I'll say personally, I didn't really hear those nice, mean drums until about halfway through my second listen of this song, where I really was trying to pick out something past that guitar. And once I caught them, they were beautiful.
The drummer is phenomenal.
He might be my highlight of the record.
That you just noted that kind of makes sense to me now that I think about it. I think one of the reasons for it sounding so cluttered is the way the distortion reacts with the crash cymbal.
Yes.
I think there's a bleed over it. That creates that whitewash to feel. So a lot of times, you're hearing this great drum solo, but then the crash cymbal comes in, you already have the heavy distortion. I'm not so sure this was mixed very well. I think I would cite a production fault on this album, and maybe for other stuff they've done also, because it's the kind of thing that I think is going to cater to audiophiles primarily.
Yeah.
You need to have really high quality versions, be listening on really good speakers. I'm not saying that it's impossible to, really get the full breadth of this work on, earbuds, but you could risk, you're really running the risk there against your ears, for instance, just having trouble, I think, from a health perspective.
Right. Well, I mean, and before we move away from it, even though I don't want to jump to the track yet, but track 3 really exemplifies what you were just talking about. This fact that there's great drum work, but it kind of gets sucked into that overwhelming static.
Yeah.
And 3 is where I really noticed that, and we'll get to that, because I remember listening to the drum solo and going, oh, this sounds really great. I wish I could hear more of it.
Right.
But back to the first track.
Yes.
The thing that really got my attention in the B section was, so we're past the nonsense lyrics, or what appear to be nonsense, at least in the beginning, and now we're into a more instrumental part, and they bring in those horns and the drum build. And that's where they're really showing a uniqueness for post-rock. Because I'm not saying that there aren't horns in post-rock, but, well, I guess that's exactly what I'm saying. Typically, I don't know, and that's not necessarily true, but, like,
Post-rock is just another one of those umbrellas.
Right.
Again, like almost the only definable thing you can pin to post-rock is that use of the guitar. Which, yeah, all right, you can see a similarity on that front. But then, if you're talking about the other ends of creative outlets, I mean, you could really do anything you want.
No, of course.
That's another special thing about this band that should be said up front. They use a lot of uncommon instruments for rock itself.
But the horn specific...
Cello is a main feature. Violins are main feature.
Well, I mean, violins and cellos are actually becoming a lot more common in post-rock and pop-rock, so...
That's true, but usually they're featured.
Exactly.
They've been
they're
on
guests,
every...
not
members
musicians.
of the band, often.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, Blue October, who we reviewed, they do have a resident violin player.
This is a rule of thumb. I can easily cite, many who do have staple
But the point I wanted to
violins.
make about the horns, though, is these kind of horns especially, you typically only heard a lot... Like, me, commonly, in the music that I would hear horns like this are more ska, or punk,
Trumpets.
You know, kind of
Trumpets
punk
are
or
what I
reggae.
think of when I think of horns, and these aren't just trumpets.
Yeah, they're used in a different way that really shows the uniqueness and the talent of this band.
I feel like I've mentioned this at some point previously, but I'm really, really liking, just on a mass music scale kind of thing, I'm really liking how brass is becoming more common in rock music. And this is not just from the ska perspective, this is from like the indie perspective, the post-rock. There are more bands that are using horns readily. It's like they just discovered that section of the staple orchestra.
Well, I think it's more to do with the fact that now that just about anybody can be a musician, what I'm saying is, with the access we have now that you didn't always have in the past, being able to get cheaper instruments to just have them and find them and get your hands on them, is allowing these bands that are coming up, especially indie bands, to use whatever they can get their hands on to make music.
Exactly.
Now,
so you meet a person and be like, oh, I play trumpet. Huh, well, I never thought of using that, but you know what? You'll do.
Yeah.
And then they end up making something wildly unique based on it.
There's also the fact that no longer are you putting up on bulletin boards, band practice, apply within. You're actually just going on a variety of websites and going, hey, I'm a musician, I need a band.
Well, there's actually, it's even one more step above that.
You're hitting 10,000 people instead of 10.
Well, there's one more step above that, too, is now bands can actually record and collaborate completely over the internet. You don't even need to be in the same room. Tribe One, who I played and mentioned before, he's in a brand new band called Malibu Shark Attack.
Yeah.
And he does the rhyming for it. The person who makes the beats for him, he lives in Atlanta, Georgia. The other guy lives in Ireland. And they're making an album together that's coming out later this year.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, that said, a conglomeration of instruments like this is definitely more of a modern thing. It's been done before, but it's becoming more common now because of access that we have and the fact that you can do mixing all over the country or all over the world.
100% true. Well, I'm loving all of these asides. Although I do have a few things to really mention about the chronology of this first track, which is really important, and the whole general vibe that it sets up for this album here. I've already mentioned the singing, I've already mentioned the distortion. From a chordal perspective, I think another reason why we tend to hone in on that distortion and really focus on the fact that they're just building and stacking instruments on top of each other and playing around with this is because of the chord progressions. It starts out, for instance, on C minor. They really play around with C minor for a while, and it's sort of quivering when you add the violins on top of that. They quiver up above to harmonize against what the main vocalist is doing. And even though the distortion is not very rumbly here, it's more in the mid-range. That's why it can kind of bleed together, because you're in C minor for so long. And then it starts to lose some of the crispness, and that's when it starts to get really, really cluttered. Then we move into just one of the chords. This is already minutes into the song, we're finally getting like a C major. So you get a lot of mode mixture here. It introduces a Mixolydian mode, grows very, very dramatic. It turns kind of positive at this point, and it builds and it builds. There's sort of a cacophony of sounds at this point, but at least it's on a more positive front.
Well,
that's the thing. It's so many minutes have passed, and you're on just like 2 chords total. That's why it can sound kind of... You're not moving around. There's not as much space. You're not moving around chordally.
Yeah, but with that, even though it didn't move around chordally, this song still didn't drag as much as other songs later on. It did kind of move, and I think the thing that really did it was everything else that was going on. Even though quarterly it didn't change that much, there was enough other things that it kept it moving.
It was a
the
layering,
other thing...
and the fact that the actual main riff that was pervasive in this A section is just very hypnotic. It is a great riff to work off of.
That's a very good point. But the thing is, in terms of moving the song forward away from that, I think that's why we really kind of honed in on B. Really, really. And that,
because
the
we
B
were
is
ready for that change.
The B, you could first
Got that
sense
really
the transition.
Nice solo.
You sense it when the bass steps in there.
Yeah.
When the bass gets really, really deep and rumbly, it's powerful. It's not showy. It's just deliberate. Meanwhile, the strings complement overhead just so well in sort of a tearful way. That's, I think, where it became most interesting, because then it's moving around chord-wise. It's not just staying still. It's almost like a fugue of sorts, where the bass line is moving around while you have these strings in sort of kind of close to that range, establishing these little dissonances, and they're just meandering around each other. That is a classic fugue right there. You have two lines working simultaneously, each as important.
Right.
So I was really, I think that's what sold me. If they had continued A section for the remainder of the song,
bored by it,
we would have definitely been bored. But B, I mean, once they step in with the trumpets there and the violins, it's just it's frantic, and yet there's so much intrigue in that section. And then the outro was pretty nice. The two
ending
female
violin,
voices.
and the violin that came in at the end.
The violin with the female voices right there.
No.
That was one of the especially...
That's what created the dissonance I was talking about, is that sound.
Well, it was also...
Because they were singing right close to that range.
And they were also overlaying their voices with really messed up syllables, which is why you can't actually hear the main singer's words. Even though there's very little going on because of how closely they're speaking on top of one another, you're getting a lot of dissonance just by the use of different syllables and sounds in the consonants.
Yeah.
Which is... It's not the more classic of a round where people are singing just different lines at the same time. This one, they're actually playing with that, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah. They had also had almost their own distinctive melody at that point. It's like this was actually very, very interesting transition into the next track, because the entire song, this entire first track, takes on almost a new personality when you enter in the female vocalists, because they're so different from anything else you had heard until that point. It was all so chaotic, and now you have this quiet, this sweetness that is being settled in, and that's what they leave the song out on. Very, very interesting for an opening track. And that leads us into track 2, Austerity Blues.
So this one starts with something that really caught my attention within the first 30 seconds, which is this aggressive guitar strum. We've covered a lot of work that has an acoustic guitar strumming, but what's so unique about this is because of the way it was played, it added this extra scratch to the sound that is very quickly, within 30 seconds, joined by the lead singer's raspy singing voice.
And it's complemented very well with the very punctuated chimes and very sweet bass.
Yeah, the chimes is really what introduced the whole thing. And yeah, the bass takes its time, does not step in right away. We get that
a minute.
That D pedal on the guitar, but it's very steady, very kind of folk sounding, very rugged. And then I think we get the melody first before the bass. The melody comes in, the vocalist starts singing.
Yeah.
And then the bass steps in.
The bass and drum come in after that, yeah. And that's
that
where it
was
really
such
brought it together.
A pointed moment for this, because we didn't get so defined of an intro, I think, for the beginning of the first track, and we get it here. This is very much like an exposition, almost more of an exposition than the first track.
Right. Well, and also I had said when we were listening to it that it reminded me very much of, I guess, a finger quotes standard post-rock start. I mean, it felt more like a rock and roll band than the previous track had. As far as what you're expecting, the standard, guitar, drum, and bass.
Well, yes and no. Because of that steady guitar, I was still I was toward the folk end of the spectrum.
Well, what I'm saying
Granted,
is it had
the bass takes you away
it
from
was
that.
It was a more formulaic composition than the previous track was. It wasn't as cluttered, it was more straightforward.
Okay, I agree with that, especially considering the melody itself.
Yeah.
It establishes this basic melody along G minor, with a twang of sadness to it. Again, it is a blues. And it builds a little bit. And after a certain point, we get a very quick B section in here, where all this tension along G minor is just sweetly released. This G major sort of along Mixolydian again here.
Okay, I gotta call you out. You're glossing over something I have in this A section that is a big problem. And that is the late introduction of the white noise guitar. The super distorted...
Oh, it did build...
Super drum.
That's what I meant when I said it sort of built a little bit, because that's the main
and this is,
building.
And it is injected into this A section, and it does take me out of what was being built there. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because it becomes much more pervasive in the rest of the song. And it's a single chord being played by a heavily distorted guitar, and it's a constant noise.
It almost sounds like it's a note being strummed really, really, really fast. That's with the effect.
That's what it's...
But it's as if it was happening throughout the entire track. Which, again, I guess that's not terribly uncommon. Again, which is post-rock we're talking about, that's almost a definable feature of it. So
but
I agree with you in that
in this case, it just became a white noise that really, because of its high volume of the track, really, really took me out of what was going on. Really did hinder my ability to listen to this song.
I didn't have as much problem in this
in this track.
In the beginning, I just needed to talk about it because it does start here.
Yeah, but it became more of a problem for me in the third track. In this track, it wasn't as much of a problem for me.
It's the kind of thing that I think creeps up on you, because this is the thing I never would have noticed if it didn't get to be so pervasive middle range. But here I thought it actually kind of provided a nice edge.
Yeah.
It establishes the tension, really. That guitar sound is the tension, and that's what gets released when I started talking about the B.
Right.
That all steps away.
Well,
Sound is the plug is pulled on it, and everything just becomes such this uplifting. You get the smooth drums, a bellowing bass. Meanwhile,
the bass really takes lead in this section, and
it
creates that more ominous sound that really rings through the rest of the track, where you kind of feel this something.
Well, I think
looming.
until then, in the A, the bass had been just repeating the same motif, and then here in the B, it actually
it took lead. It became to do something different. Yeah, and I mean, it's also then. I mean, even later on when we get to around the 9-minute mark where the violins come in.
Oh, I'm not there yet. First of all,
we're about the 2.5-minute mark right now.
Yeah. This is actually a fairly short section. It just kind of breaks it up a little bit, but it introduced some of the most intriguing, perhaps the most original work on this album and what we've done in general, because the use of strings here, sort of gliding and fluttering off one another over that bass, it was a very, very interesting mesh. And because of the place it served at this point, just releasing that tension, I was really enjoying that. But admittedly, we do go back to the A right after this. We get more of what we got in the beginning, and this is where I think John's point starts to sort of hit home a little bit.
And this
is
is
where the distortion is heavy.
This is where it becomes overly static filled, and it's got glimpses of these great ideas amidst all this clutter that's going on. And it's almost like you're tuning in and out of stations. You hear something on the radio, it sounds great, and you immediately start pulling the dial again, and it hits that white noise. You come into something, it sounds great. I kind of wish they stayed a little bit more on each idea, each little bit that they're producing.
Well, the problem
is they're doing great stuff. There's some bass drum comping going on that's just really, really interesting. There's some single guitar work going on that's really interesting.
And this is all within that A prime.
Between about 2:45 and 9 minutes. There's so much going on.
It did go on quite a while.
So many ideas in here, but it keeps getting drowned out by the white noise. And I just can't stay in the groove long enough.
The biggest problem here, I think, is the fact that there is so many interesting things going on in the background. It's not a matter of the fact that they're not really focused on that. It's just that the other things they're putting is pulling away from it. It looks like they're working just as hard on both. The problem is that whitewash, that white noise, kind of pulls you out of it.
Yeah, it really does a job of diluting the rest of the instruments.
I want to be careful here, because this is a song where it can really vary from minute to minute. It's very important to talk about this in terms of section here. So, for instance...
That's what I mean with the whole dialing radio.
Yeah, and I do kind of get that. But, see, I still think it fits from an artistic standpoint. It's just maybe not from an enjoyment standpoint, because it seems like we can we could be really on with this distortion at times. We could be really off with it as others.
Yeah.
I've pointed out that maybe one instance where it's almost universally jarring is when it combines with the crash cymbal. It's when other certain sounds blend with it. It just seems like someone was falling asleep at the production board.
Yeah,
like
but
someone there needed to just step in and say, guys, maybe we should just think about this one section a little bit differently, or pull one instrument out, or maybe replace it with something a little lighter, a little airier here, because right now I have a block of red on the screen.
Yeah, but that's also the thing is, and we've said this dozens of times, when we have to mention the word, I see where they're coming from artistically, it also is alluding to the fact that we're giving an exception because of art versus the music. We're making excuses, and well,
I go back and forth on that. Because
no, I know.
Sometimes I think about it in the exact opposite perspective. Like, all right, so I didn't enjoy it, but I really, really get it.
No, and yes, it's a fine line, and that's what I'm trying to say. And this band rides that line throughout pretty much the entire record.
That's true.
It teeters between these two things where you go, wow, that's really interesting, but not for me, to, wow, that I really like this, but it's not that interesting.
All right, well then this reinforces my point that I should keep talking about this in sections. So, for instance, this A prime section, one of the issues I had with it was, of course, there's more tension here, and it does not get released in the same way that it did from the first A to B. I was not as much a fan of the soloing here that occurred, because it seems like they're sort of meandering around. At this point, this is in the section of the song that immediately precedes 4 minutes, approximately 4:15, just for reference here. Immediately preceding that, there's just some meandering I couldn't really grapple with. Like from a improvisational standpoint, I'm thinking of alternatives to this, or ways in which they could have made this a much smoother transition. But I think that the whole point is to provide just filler here, and I think this was a crucial flaw. It is filler to hurry it to the point in which it really goes full force at 4 minutes and 14 seconds.
What the bummer is that it's the beautiful thing is what they're using as filler. Like these great solos that would sound so much nicer if there wasn't a huge chunk of white noise over it. They're using that as a connecting filler instead of actually focusing on it, and I think that was the problem.
Well, also more than that, the crux point, almost the crucial point of this song, where everything starts breaking loose, was that 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Which, for the hell of it, I'll just call it a C section, because it was a rock between the minor 1 and the major 4 chord, G minor, C major. I think this is really the section that we're all talking about that was seriously cluttered. It's something that didn't get me immediately, though, because as soon as it breaks out, it's sort of this awesome breakdown. I'm like, all right, yeah, let's rock out with this. But you sit with it for a while, and you're right, this does keep going, I think, until
so long.
9 minutes.
It does. Well, because 9 minutes is where the section I want to talk about came in, and that's where we get to... Well, because it was just... I like when they...
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, I like when they focus on certain things without the white noise, or they let it breathe and become more airy. And the fact is, in this section leading up to the 9 minutes, it just becomes so overly cluttered and drowned. And they don't let the really fine points that I'd say were the best points of the song, whether they are or not is purely opinion. But to me, the best parts of the song got completely clobbered by this white noise.
It's not just the white noise. There's a little bit too much bass and drum distortion going on here. They're just putting in a lot of extra instruments. Maybe, I don't know, how many band players are there here? How many guys are there?
Just 5 people.
Just 5?
5.
I assume that they're all, 5 times over multi-instrumentalists.
I need to go back to this word. Distortion. When you have a pedal there, it can sound like it's a whole entire... It's almost like making up for
there's
a lack of...
3 or 4 guitars going on.
No, there's not. There's really
sounds
not.
like.
I don't think there is. A lot of what you're hearing is the violins. I believe there's 2 violinists, and I think they're using an effect as well, and that's clashing against the guitar player. And then I think the bass also is using distortion. I think it's that combination that makes it seem as if there's a lot more going on here than there really is. If you just turn down some of these levels, I think I would enjoy this so much better.
Yeah, I agree completely.
I do want to say, though, this section's seen in a different way. Like, this is the last point, and then I really want to get to the next section because it's by far much more interesting. It would be kind of a dull chord progression, I think, if it wasn't for those harmonies. And if you do listen really close, and if you can tune it all out, there's some pretty interesting things going on. Sometimes it's dissonant, sometimes it's graceful. It's really an interesting play off these two extremes. You got the violins doing their tremolo. That's again another thing that can be distort. You don't even need you rarely need an effect or a pedal when you have violins doing tremolo, because it's sort of a frantic sound in of itself. Who knows what effect that's going to have once you combine that with a guitar that has its respective distortion. And then you have the drums. Again, I think crash cymbal might be a problem there, but it's still really impressive drum work. So I'm nearly at the point where I want to say that this section is really up to taste. I think people that like their heavier work will like this. I almost want to say that this section right here, we could break right in immediately with your burn it, buy it, or burn it, listen to it, or buy it thing.
Yes.
You could do that right here in this section, because there's other parts here where I could say from a musical standpoint, all right, that's just so good. But this, I personally teeter back and forth from second to second.
Well, I think this might be one of those albums where we
Yeah.
can't even give it that much of a generalization, but we'll see when we get to the end of it.
So let's talk about the last really, really interesting turn in this song.
So around 9 minutes.
Well, real quickly, yeah, around 9 minutes, you get that tremolo that has been going nearly... Well, it was more prominent, I think, in the latter half of the point preceding these 9 minutes. And then it is the fade out. It fades, and you get a nice, smooth transition where I think it's just drums. Almost
drums.
solitary, yeah.
Yeah.
Bass and drums. And that is the transition that eventually we drop section D.
Right.
Where
The
everything is a lot darker.
So,
the
yeah.
explosion.
So what happens is they bring in violins and singing in a much lower, less whiny tone.
Yes.
And these two sounds together create this cooling off effect that really kind of takes us through the end of the track. And it has a sound that was, I don't know if I want to say better or worse, but definitely more engaging to me, because it was pulling on something that I was looking for.
It was using things like the earlier heavy acoustic guitar had become a more punctuated guitar work, much less distortion. Everything was a lot more clear cut. You still had that more pervasive backup guitar going on, but it wasn't just drowning anymore. I was really getting a chance to breathe in this. I was getting a chance to wallow in this darkness that they're building.
That's the very interesting thing here. By all intents and purposes, this is a much darker section of the track.
Hence wallow.
Hence swallowing. But it is so much thinner. You can hear individual things, and frankly, there's really more going on. There's more going on from a chordal perspective, but there's less going on from a stack instruments and effects until we drown perspective. It really does step away from the previous section, which was the exact opposite. Simple from a chord perspective, but stack instruments until we drown. 1 and 4, again, that was the previous section. 1 and 4, that really is it. It's almost a staple chord pair in terms of let's have this crazy rocked out breakdown, but they just lose themselves in it for long periods of time. This next section, this D section, is far more brilliant. It moves us through this whole progression, which eventually does return us to G major, which is more similar to the release tension effect that we got way back in section B, which was such a release then. So again, we're talking about a really, really long song here because it's been so long since we've been there. It is, I suppose you could say that you've been through the thick of it.
Yeah.
And it has a...
So there is a well-rounded effect.
Well, in this case, I don't really see the same release you're talking about. It's more of a breakdown. It's not as abrupt or as satisfying. It's more... It takes longer to fully unfurl what it's doing. It de-evolves instead of transitions. And because of that more drawn nature, it felt a little bit drawn to me. I felt like they could have wrapped it up a little bit quicker, to go into that final outro kind of a piece. But
that's probably true.
It was significantly more interesting.
Yeah, I felt like the
that.
cooling off did take a little long. I mean,
I did.
You're right. You don't drop back to the B section like you did from A to B. This is kind of it tapers off, and it is pretty. It's gentle. It really is gentle. It dies down, but you do eventually get the same tension release. It's just it's a come down.
It's pulling something thick and elastic. So thin until it disappears.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of putting it. And you know, as beautiful as it is, because this thing, I think my favorite part of this song really is that, you know, when I'm pulling the B section. I knew it the first time I heard it early in the track, and I know it now. Although, even this, I think, is something that could have used a little bit more variation from a chordal perspective, because I think they were running the same problem of being meandering. The solos were just a little bit off at points where I was trying to dissect the target note here and there. It's just,
Instead of
I really wanted to like it though.
Instead of being dramatic, which is a great way of putting this music, it's very understated, passively dramatic.
Yeah.
Here you're getting kind of melodramatic. Here they're just taking it a little bit too far. They're acting it up a little bit too much.
Yeah, but you do have the outro
with the choir chant, tribal choir. I don't know how to put it.
Was there a choir here?
Yes, I wrote it down.
He wrote it down.
It must be true.
It had a great, a really, really unusual inflection in the vocal work going on here. Problem with this, it still had that kind of sugary, kind of just sweet kind of a feel as the rest of the song. It was
that similar
pretty,
to the previous?
It was pretty, but it wasn't quite beautiful for me. Because it still had that kind of
at this point.
No, it still had that. It still was losing cohesion. It was still doing that same de-evolution, that same breaking apart, instead of being cohesive.
Well, I do think the outro kind of crumbled apart, especially considering they returned to the distortion, which, interestingly enough, as of course has been present throughout the whole entire thing. Here at the end, that's exactly what they close out on. They pull the plug on the music entirely, and they just let the feedback, which is a pretty common way to end a rock track. Almost a cliche at this point. Just
not almost. It's a cliche at this point.
It really is. Let's just let the distortion do the talking. Yeah. But that was almost a little bit obnoxious after this track, which, I've had enough of it. I don't need that alone. But, again, from an artistic standpoint, it is a nice callback.
I guess, but you're calling back to something that's so obvious.
Yeah. Either way, I'm very... by the way, I remember the chorus you were talking about now. It was the same mantra that was muttered over and over and over.
Yeah.
It was that, Lord, let my son live long enough to see that mountain torn down. That was the line that gets repeated for a very, very long time. It's still a very soothing section as a whole, but it just felt a little bit rambly. Yeah. So I think my final word on this track is that it's not for everyone. I think if you can sit in this for a while, it's probably your thing.
I think we've kind of made that very clear at this point. Speaking to clarity, actually my clear favorite, I think, on the whole record, at least in points, if not the whole song, is the next track. Take Away These Early Grave Blues features an opening, I don't want to say monologue, it's only a couple of lines, of a British girl talking about... it's kind of really hard to follow a lot of the stuff that they're putting these intros, and they seem kind of plucked out of thin air. But she's actually talking about this kind of devastation in her hometown, or where she's from, in her life, and this kind of thing that's happening.
You got all that?
I got some of that, so I'm going to agree.
All right, yeah.
But
whatever.
But the song, so it has a very strong intro that starts with a great drum section. This is where you really get a full sense of how good their drummer is, because in the other songs it's been kind of layered and overlayered, and you couldn't really hear it clearly.
No, he's getting a nice little solo intro here. I like that.
Well, that was not really the intro. Apart from the girl, the real intro is this sort of minor pentatonic. It's sort of Eastern sounding, with the string. It's very new for the album, I think. It's not something we've had so far, and it actually is a motif that is very, very well utilized throughout this entire track. And you get that right there, right up front. And it's going to return in a very, very big way. I rather enjoyed that. And then it goes into, you get distortion, but, again, we're kind of used to that at this point.
The drums really, really setting the tone. And then the
Yeah.
bass, once again, paralleling it, comping it.
Yes.
Which I think the two of them working in tandem do a hell of a job of creating a great rhythm. And even to some extent, the actual melody is them.
The melody, it's a lot of repeating the very line of the song. Take away these early grave blues.
But having
they
it
loop and
stated
layer those lyrics.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
stated and restated on top of the drums. I love that really high energy that it brings to it. And the first thing that comes to mind is I want to see the movie, the anime that this is based on, because there's a lot of energy here. You didn't get it in the other songs. A lot of energy. Very fresh, very refreshing because of that.
It was the closest that we got also to like a more positive feeling in the beginning of a track. I mean, it wasn't.
It wasn't even close to. It was positive.
It just wasn't.
It was
and definitely wasn't
energized.
overwhelmingly depressing like a lot of the other tracks had sounded.
Just really, despite the title?
Well, title aside, like I said, you can't always judge a song by its title. And the title, yes, does seem very depressing, but the song, at least in the beginning, did not convey the same kind of overwhelmingly depressing nature.
No, you're probably true. I mean, but you still, I don't know. I'm back and forth on that, because then again, I did feel like there was a lot of underlying anger in the return of the A section, because it's sort of broken up. I think that Eastern sounding minor pentatonic string effect is used as a transition here. It breaks up sections. And it's also broken up within the sections, and again, that's why I said it was well utilized, because that single motif is unpacked and then repacked in a really big way, but in its pure original form, it gets used as a transition. But then when we go back to A, I think it was actually filled with quite a bit of anger, which I think does fit the title. So
I will
positive,
not say-
maybe later.
We've talked about this before. Anger is not necessarily a negative emotion because of the levels of the faster pace that they're setting here, the heavier reliance on the percussion side of things. It may be angry, but it's not a negative kind of anger going on here. Not yet.
It's
That
not
does
negative,
happen.
not as in like dark as we had in the previous track, but
But we're not getting depression. We're not getting melancholy. There's just too much energy here for that.
that's true. But you know what? I think another reason is the introduction of the trumpets.
Yeah.
We get that a lot more here than we did in the previous track. The previous track was very string oriented, and here the trumpets step in, and it gives it this very Mediterranean feel almost. Actually, one band that came to mind was Beirut.
Okay.
If any of you know Beirut, well, I mean, they're all about sort of Mediterranean-sounding instruments or Baltic-sounding instruments. They're like Baltic Baroque, but and that's almost what I get out of this. The utilization of brass here is very, very important, and I think we get that in the B section as well, which is a little bit more frantic, but this time we're joined in with the vocalists. I believe this was a whole separate verse.
Yeah, well, the B section comes in around 2:40 or so. This is one of the shorter tracks. It was 6 minutes or so long.
Shorter tracks.
When the B section comes in, though, it's followed up with this great building, pretty much mainlined by the drums and the bass, that give this kind of build that eventually climaxes towards the end of the song.
Yeah, that was the one that sort of went back and forth between D minor and F major, and I think I do agree that section had some joy in it. These sort of intermittent spurts of joy. And
this really became, for me, the most varied song because of this. This is where I really feel like, where in the first two tracks they like to sit on something, here they're sitting on their main idea, but they're trying to expand it in a broader variety of ways, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it immensely, but it does start repeating itself, and because of that, it starts getting a little repetitive for me.
See, I disagree only because
Because it repeats itself, it gets repetitive.
No, but the repeating is one thing. Repetitive is another.
again
I
though
understand what you're saying. I'm going to try to flesh this out in a coherent fashion. This is a shorter track, yes, but I believe it's more of a theme and variation type thing, where the theme really revolves around that take away these early gray blues, and a lot of it is that repeating mantra. But each time they return to to that section, they reinvent something. They reinvent some aspect of the instrumentation. Take out one instrument, replace it with another, or this time we'll say it soft, this time we'll say it loud. It kind of makes it. It keeps it a little bit interesting, but in the same token, you also have to remember, yes, there's still, at its core, they're still repeating the same thing over and over again. So it's sort of a give and take. It's almost the opposite, again, of the previous track, or what we got in the first and second, where certain things would be dragging, but at the same time, that
There's so much going
there's
on.
so much going on, and it ends in a very different place than it began. It's really a story. It is not. First and second track are not themes and variations. They are much more than that. They have They are broken up in sections.
And I guess for me, I think the reason that it didn't get so repetitive as John felt was because I wasn't really focusing on the lyrics at all. They were pretty much a background.
No, I wasn't focusing on.
But
them.
still, the thing that I was focusing on that kept it interesting and new for me was the drums. The drums took much more of a forefront in this track, and I was able to focus on the variation in the drums that kept me going through the song, and I never once felt it was repetitive because of that. But again, it was where my focus lied in what I was enjoying, I think, and that's a lot of this album, is where your focus falls will determine how much you enjoy it or what you enjoy about it.
Well, that's a great point, because towards the end of the song, one of the things that really actually brought it back up for me and almost made it my favorite song.
The slower drums.
The slower drums.
The staggered
and
drum
those,
beat, yeah.
And those flighty but attitude-filled high string work that gets thrown on top of everything, which really does a great job of really presenting something new for this song. And just doing pretty things here. It's so hard to describe.
No, that's the thing. There are
It's
certain
just
sections
beautiful.
here where I do think you just have to zone out to for a while, and whether it's your thing, well, good, great, bully for you. If it's not, just put it down for a while, try it again later. I think again, this is why I still call it, at the end of the day, I still call it somewhat of a mature work, despite the sections that sometimes feel a little rambly. I think there's a lot of forward thinking in their work. Forward thinking in the album.
I don't think there's a sense of immaturity throughout the entire record. I agree. I think it's a very mature record, and it comes across, even in its scatteredness. And that slow beauty really leads us into the next track.
Yes.
But the outro.
He likes that outro.
No, I don't. I don't like this outro. The outro is extremely disappointing, and that's what kept it from being my favorite track.
What?
It was abrupt. It was extremely abrupt. And I don't really like the way they ended the song. It was jarring for me.
I might disagree with you with that.
I
I think the slow
definitely
drums.
disagree.
No,
that was the outro.
You agreed with me while we were listening. You looked at me, nodded your head, and said, yes, that's right.
I thought you agreed with me just now. See, it's tricky with this song. It's really tricky to hone down the sections.
There's so many things going on here.
We're not always on the same page.
Yeah.
No, and
it's tricky.
Although I feel like we are on track 4. Track 4 is called Little Ones Run. This is the shortest track on the record. It's only 2.5 minutes or so. And
this is evergreen.
It's kind of impossible to be not on the same page here.
So this song...
But first of all, just to interject here, John keeps mentioning this, this is evergreen here. It's a little callback to episode 67 where we reviewed Scale the Summit's The Migration, which was basically the one short, straightforward, sweet, punchy track in the middle of an otherwise busy epic. And this kind of does serve the same purpose. This really is that evergreen.
So this song is almost more emotional than most of the other tracks. Even though it's short, it engages you quite quickly, and it's very heart-wrenching, horribly depressing and sad. But really what sells it for me is there's a piano being played in this track, but the focus of the piano is pulled to this one A note that's accenting almost every section.
You know, it's funny because you see that as the focus. I see it as somewhat of an aside, but it's still very pointed, and this is really, really funny when we're struggling to describe previous tracks and all the different sections, all the different instruments. Here we're almost struggling to describe individual notes.
Yeah.
Because by comparison, this is such a thin track. The piano is not just a played piano. Yes, there's a person sitting in front of it, but also, I think they got I don't know whether it's an upright or a grand or whatever, but they got the top open and they are using what they call prepared piano from a contemporary classical standpoint, which is really just plucking it. It's actually using it as a plucked instrument, which is very easy to do. It's just strings. You just reach over, and if you know which string to go for, then pluck it. And it's using that combined with a person who's actually playing, and it's giving this one instrument this varied texture, which makes it seem so diverse. Even though it's slow, steady, like 4/4 pretty much, just playing right there on the quarter note, very slow, very deliberate, and the level of complexity really steps in when you're talking about the vocalists, the two female singers.
The harmonies
harmonize so beautifully.
Not just the harmonies, but the disharmonies they purposely do. The times when they're actually singing on different keys, when they're really competing for your attention, but in just a sweet, almost sultry kind of a way.
Well, they sing in what they call a tessitura, which is sort of a comfortable vocal range for everyone, and they sing right in the middle range. They're both there. They're both in that same range, and that's why they sometimes clash against one another, and it makes it very, very surreal when they do. That's how you get that dissonance. It's just between the two vocalists, and that works really well off the piano, which is already present. And now I will go back to Matt, that note that you love, which I think is why you're honing in on it. And it's the one note on the piano that is really out of that low range. It's the one that's way up at the high. I think it's a high A. And once you combine that note against everybody else who's stuck in this low to middle range, you really have the full breadth of the spectrum there. And it's amazing for how short is this track?
240, I think. 240. Something like that.
For me, the reason I keep calling it back Evergreen, this is like Evergreen from Scale the Summit. It is my favorite track. This is the one that's just a heart-wrenching glimpse of beauty. It's that moment of beauty that is put in a elongated song form that I just love.
I mean, I have to admit that because in all of the other tracks they use all this heavy distortion, in a moment where they actually take a step back from it and do a nice short, sweet track where they don't use it, they convey so much beauty in such a short amount of time. Yeah. And I feel like that's what we were struggling to find in the other tracks. We were finding moments of true beauty, but they were being buried by all the other stuff.
On that same token, though, I want to say almost that the fact that we were hovering around the loud, build department in these earlier tracks really made this release so sweet. You know, you walk a strange line with that. I'm not saying that it's impossible to, write earlier tracks that had a little bit more ebbs and flows, but from a volume standpoint, because I think really that's the main problem we have here. We're not even really arguing anything else except just loudness and production value, but for those earlier tracks. But I still think that if they served one purpose, it makes this moment so profound.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose
it's a context. It's a context catch-22.
Right, to make it so lame that a ton of bad to make the one good seem better.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying that's the kind of most layman way to put it. Doesn't necessarily make the whole thing good just because they're building to that.
It also doesn't speak well to what they may be going for. If that was purposely done, if the cacophony...
I'm sure it was purposely done, though.
I don't know
if the cacophony of contradictions that they're putting in this earlier music, these earlier tracks, the back and forth, the lots of loud, was specifically just to make that one song good? Or better?
Well, that's not... See, you're a little more narrowly than I see.
No, I don't think they're doing that. I don't think they're doing that. And if that's what they were going for, that doesn't speak well to the art. I can't see them going for that because there's a lot of art here.
No, I agree, and that's not really what I meant. But I do think it would be a side point. It would be it's sort of a stage presence kind of thing. A build, really, really time your release. But it's just one element. It's one element, and frankly, we're being a little bit harsh here because two opening tracks, as we've already mentioned, the 3 opening tracks, really did have their ups and downs. They just had certain sections which we take issues with and have discrepancies. But I do want to say one more thing about this track. Aside from the very sweet melody that basically persists and we all just pretty much swoon over, there is a little bit of variation toward the end where I think we do get an introduced instrument. I believe it sounded almost like a cello or an upright bass, although for all I know it could have been like a bowed piano string because they seem crazy enough to do that.
Maybe
but
it's a harp.
I doubt
like a
that.
really messed up harp.
I doubt that. Although I think I was really looking at the instruments that were present on this album, and I didn't see anything else outside of that. So I think there might have been an upright bass. So I'm gonna assume that primarily. Either way, it's a little bit of more depth that came at the very, very end here, and I think it functioned as a good transition because you add a little bit more low range than you usually get. Again, you're mainly in the mid range here, and that provided a little bit more breadth at the bottom end. Also, you're joined by the primary male vocalist at that point, only at the tail end of this very short track. So, yeah, what can I say? It's a very ethereal song.
Yes, that's I think a great way to wrap up. And it's funny.
I have one quote also from this track that I was able to gather. It was, "They gather up what's left to save, leave the rest and fly away." I believe the whole entire song is about the nature of birds.
I could see that.
I could
easily see that.
Yeah.
There you are.
Moving on to track 5, "What We Loved Is Not Enough." So now we get into another longer track before the closing track, which is track 6, which is also on the shorter side. So track 5, from the moment it starts, more or less, you get this kind of sweeping, almost vast, breathy nature that really wasn't... I mean, I guess there was a little bit of breathiness in some of the other songs, but this is where you really feel like this is more of an open field that we're walking into. And it quickly goes into a meter that's more or less a waltz, Steve had pointed out.
Yes, and I have some comments about that opening section, though. That there's, again, more texture here. Really, really interesting. Different than anything we've had.
The guitar pacing was probably the most telling part of this, because really they were letting it stand out on its own.
I was honing in more on the strings, actually. The strings...
It was before the strings were really even in the song. They let the guitar start it to really set the pacing and not be used as a riff machine.
Was it? Because this was really early on, as I'm thinking. I'm talking about a single thing. The glissando, the slide that just goes between 2 notes, A and B, very soft. And I think this is that open air feeling that you were talking about, Matt. It's just from one note, slides up, and then slides back down. Mm-hmm. I think it's just from A to B. I think later in the track it slides up to D, and then back to A, then down to B, A, then up to B, and it's just sort of this little cycle. That is different because we haven't had a slide in here so far. Again, I really love when they play around with texture. That's what I love most when you look at an album from first track to last.
I didn't even hone in on that. I noticed it. The sweeps they were throwing in the strings did a lot to add texture, but it was I felt like they were really treating the guitar differently. That's like what I really honed in on. They finally were making it a classic rock style guitar. The whole nature of how it's being played felt so different.
That's something I didn't pick up on necessarily.
Me neither. I mean, I did like, though, that something that was even continuing to be different about this track is it did still go through changes, but the changes weren't as vast as other longer tracks. All the other longer tracks had gone through all of these very meticulous changes, whereas this track felt much more concise and themed throughout. It didn't really seem to jump around as much as the other tracks had. That waltz feel kind of followed through the whole thing.
And that's where I found things to actually be going awry for me. Because when they start to build upon this initial A section, it really is more startling than anything else. I feel like they may have skipped a few steps in their first major build, leading up to the crescendo that it goes to. it drew me out, and I never really recovered after that.
You know, I have a feeling we're going to be going back and forth on this track in a very similar way that we did with the first two. So this is really going to be a point of citing the positives, citing the negatives. I'm more along the lines with Matt here. I think this was a much more cohesive product to me, in general. I want to say that maybe something was needed between that opening A section and when the distortion returns in section B. Again, it's all about filling in this space that sometimes it fills in the space with distortion, or how are you going to fill in the space between two different iterations of distortion? That's very bizarre to think of a song that way, where distortion is your signifier, your yes, part A, but it kind of is the most it's the most obtrusive feature about this. But yes, it is a waltz in general, and to be honest,
It's a round.
it's kind of a round.
It's
more
very,
of a,
very close to a round.
I saw it as more of like a nice 6/4 waltz. Well, waltz would be more 3, but you know, when you bump up to 6, it's not really that big a deal. It still has kind of a ballad feel to it.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of tricky to say, but I'm on. Just consider the opening line. What we loved was not enough. It's almost like that's all you need.
Yeah.
You say that line, so I don't need as much variation throughout this, although it does vary. Once you say that, what we loved was not enough, and you can hear the way he says that, he's almost not so much singing it as it's just spoken word again. It's just, what we loved was not enough.
It's
and that's
matter of fact.
It's
yeah.
matter of fact, exactly. Perfect. That is this track, and I think a waltz is a pretty good way to flush that idea out.
I think
it's almost a hypnotic, picture like zombies waltzing or something like that.
No, I can totally see that, and I think thematically it's kind of a solid thought. I feel like it doesn't get boring. It just it moves through, almost zombie-esque. It's just kind of moving through the motions.
Yeah, which I was okay after what we've had so far.
Me too.
But you spoke to something in track 3, Take Away These Early Grave Blues, how the sectional, the B section of revisiting was something that kind of hurt it for you. And in here, the revisitations of that A section, because it really does get kind of pervasive, and it does become an aspect of every single chordal progression in the song. It's present there, and it just became too wearing on me. I do like the more simplified, earnest sections, but there's just too much similarity that it really did get to be just droning after a little while. It just felt, I don't know, maybe
I think
adjectives here are failing me, because
No.
I want to use words
Hold on
like
a
wobbly. I want to use words like just falling apart or things like that, and these aren't really accurate, but there's just something ineffable here that doesn't quite fit for me.
Well, I'll try to flesh out the ineffable that does fit for me. Speaking to one of your points here, you did mention that I compared this. I mean, you're comparing this to track 3, or to the way I saw track 3, and how that unchanging nature was a bit of a minus point. I think it has to do with the fact that the chordal movement here was a lot more complex. I think they were doing more with this basic idea. So as you're moving throughout this waltz here, you can feel yourself on the ballroom floor, and you're moving from one side to the next. It's not just this static thing. It's static in the basic idea that what we loved was not enough. You always feel that lingering overhead, that's not a bad thing. That's the theme. All right, fine. But the actual development of this track is very, very, I think, engaging.
And I think that's where we're actually arguing from opposite sides, because in this case, I think for me, the simple idea in Takeaway was more engaging, so I did not mind they were doing less exploration of it.
Yeah,
I enjoyed that progression more, and the way they just didn't really change it as much or as complicated. but it was, to me, just something I liked more.
Okay. You know, and I have a reason for that also, because that's, I had more to look at here, I think. More than the stuff we've been familiar with. I've already kind of honed in and explained what the primary features of this band's repertoire that I really like are. One of those was the brass. We get so much brass here. The brass harmonies are beautiful, and they carry it along to me. They carry me along with the song. I feel whisked away.
I think that I'm in agreement with Steve on this. I feel like that you're really taken along and pulled along with this, and I don't feel that. I feel like the clutter and the clutter and repetitiveness of the third track was hit or miss, whereas here I had already accepted the overall theme from the first minute, so it going on for a little longer I was okay with because I wanted to go along for the ride.
There's also points later I want to point out where that waltz feeling, that Mediterranean waltz feels very grand. It steps up from just this piddling little affair to a grand ballroom kind of thing. Very interestingly, that's where the distortion was very heavy, and in this particular case, it did not hurt it at all.
No.
It actually it made it seem about as epic as they had presented it.
And that's where I'm gonna say I love the simplistic side of this song, the actual broken apart bits, because they felt the most earnest and it felt the most devastating. It's where you actually that's where I felt the most lost.
When everything gets unplugged and
where
we go back down
was
very
not
soft.
enough. There's it's distinctly low ends in the beginning, the middle, and end.
I remember that. I remember one was about at 6 minutes,
sections,
and one was about at 9 minutes.
Those 3 sections are really the most guttural and visceral parts of the song for me.
I agree, because that's also when you can hear the brass very, very crisp.
Yeah,
and that is the part of the song I thoroughly love, and it's the building and the reinvention and the expansion that I just cannot enjoy. I wish I could, because it is
the louder point.
It's cool. I just don't enjoy it.
I'll agree with you on just one point. I think those louder sections could have really benefited from some dynamics.
Probably, but I think at this point it's clearly
a taste issue.
A taste issue, yeah.
I kind of wanted more of Little One's Run.
And no, I didn't. I disagree.
Well, no, that kind of simplified sadness.
No. I think anything in a long form following that track would not have lived up.
Yeah, I agree. But it's funny that you mentioned Grand Ballroom before, because that actually takes us into our 5th track. That Grand Ballroom sound, the title of...
I'll just talk about the transition because it's important in leading us to that. And that's... the outro was, again, we return to a choir. It's the 2 female vocalists, which just... That waltz sort of tapers off again, and first of all, there's a little bit of overlap, where the vocalists are stepping in there with their gorgeous harmonies. The resonance is just so crisp, and slowly it boils down to the point where they're the only thing remaining.
Yeah.
And that is what just a few more seconds of that, just hearing the female vocalist alone, which again, more varied texture for the album. Haven't heard that yet. That's a perfect way to end. Yeah. I think it was one of the best outros in the entire album.
It was definitely one of my favorites as well.
It does lead into Rains Through the Roof at the Grand Ballroom.
It's funny I said Grand Ballroom before, and I wasn't even thinking about this track title.
Right, and that
was just something that came to mind.
But that's what's so brilliant about the art, is that you got that Grand Ballroom feel, and then the next track is actually about that, and sort of.
The introduction is...
I just thought of this now. Unbelievable.
The introduction is so theatrical.
Yeah.
This is really got a lot of that coloration that you would think of a stage producing.
So this is another shorter track. The conclusionary track is only a little over 3 minutes, I think. And this is a song where you notice something very interesting from the very beginning. You hear a kettle drum, but it's not played in a typical style. Typically, kettle drums you hear are very Caribbean or very upbeat, but in this, it's
kind of tinny.
Yeah, in this, it's drawn out and spaced enough that it actually gives this kind of sad, melancholy feel. This kind of drone for a kettle drum, which is very unique. And not something you hear commonly when a kettle drum is introduced.
Instead of being tinny and exuberant, it actually feels hollow. was just a good
Yes.
way of actually setting the stage for what this is doing. The theatrical introduction, it makes use of a couple of new ideas. Once again, we've got choir synth. I guess is the way we kind of used it. A high-end synth that was really that was kind of replicating those high-end falsetto vocal work that you get in classical choirs.
It is. At the same time, it's very, very pitchy. It doesn't really sound human at all.
And
Yeah.
that's why we just put the word synth on here, because we're not even hearing a guitar. It's just
But these
the tone's a little bit off.
It's an effect. I mean, the 21st century.
But this is something, another new introduction here, another new little segment that they're throwing in here, and it's got a great dichotomy going on with this drum.
Yes, and also the thing is, those sounds together really give another kind of ominous sound that we've gotten earlier in the album, but this time delivered a little differently. But you still get this kind of ominous, looming feel from these two sounds together. And there are things that are added even later that I say even later, but it's a fairly short track. But there are things that are added later that really kind of enhance that. I mean, we were talking before about that accented key, that high A note that I really liked. Here, there's almost no piano at all, except for a single key being played for accent, which is with the kettle drum and that distortion synth, whatever it was, really enforces that ominous feeling, this strange place that this track is going.
Yeah, no, it sounded like a kettle drum, but it may very well have just been a variety of tom-tom.
It
Yeah,
could be,
you know.
too. But it still got that sound, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really that piano. It felt like they were hyphenating the music, I guess is a way to put it, or throwing commas in there. I mean, it felt like a piece of grammar.
Or throwing in accents.
No.
An accent.
It didn't feel like just a standard accent.
He's
I'm
coming
not
up with
saying it that way.
metaphors for things
It
that there
doesn't
are
actually-
existing
Big
words
words
for.
for.
No,
Yeah.
no. It doesn't accent the music all the time. That's the whole thing. Sometimes it's used to break up the actual flow of one of the other
I
instruments.
understand what you're saying.
It does it not just to comp, but also to be a little bit discorded with the actual music, and it's very, very. I can't put it any other way but intelligent placing of those notes. It's just really freaking smart the way they threw them in there, the way they placed them. Very methodical.
There was a very intelligent design to this last song, for sure.
Yeah. Well, no, you were doing good there. I thought I'd take a little load off. You know, there's very little I have to say about this track because it kind of is just the period at the end of the sentence. To be perfectly honest,
That's true.
I'd really tried to come up with something for this, but it's not filled out like many of the other tracks are. It's clearly just a closer. Even from the beginning, you get that impression. It's not like it's trying to go off into yet another epic on the way out. It almost serves the same exact purpose as Little One's Run did.
Yeah, I can definitely see that too.
Yeah.
And it does have one thing which I don't know how to describe it, but the terrifying ending. Truly a disconcerting ending to this song in
And
the
to the
last
album.
few in the last few notes.
Maybe I'm disenchanted with that because that's coming from a person who knows the band. That's just so typical what they do. Again,
Well, we don't
Melancholy.
know the band.
Oh, right, fine. But Melancholy is sort of across the board with what they do. Not always, but especially when I consider some elements of this album, such as that previous track, "What We Loved Was Not Enough." The positive waltz feel there is actually kind of more in the. That's odd for them to be so positive. So then when I hear them being negative, I'm just like, okay, well, it's back to good old-fashioned
Debbie
Silver
Downer.
Mount Zion, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry that the good old fashioned was a really great closer to a pretty damn good album. I'm sorry that you couldn't get the full feel because you already like them.
Is this sarcasm?
Yeah, it's sarcasm.
He was almost being incredulous. That's usually my job.
I was borderline incredulous.
You were?
Border.
Yeah.
I haven't done that in like 20 episodes, so you know.
Like 20 of them?
Yeah.
Okay, well now you can start counting over. That was incredulous. It was for as much as the introduction did introduce the album, this finale finalized it. It does have a very complete feel. Do you have anything? Anybody have anything more to add, or am I going into the wrap up?
I think we're ready.
Yeah, go
Okay.
for it.
Well, this is thinking music. We keep using it's mature music. No, it's even further than that. You gotta really delve into the intelligence in this. You have to try to pick it apart because there's such great little gems in here. Even the songs or pieces, is pieces appropriate in some of these cases, Steve?
You know, it has the effect of a piece, but
It's still a song.
They sing in each one.
These
so.
mostly songs. There's so much going on here that there will be bad because there's just so much they're trying to do. I don't feel like it can all be good with this sort of a attack on music. It's got real substance to it, and some of the parts that really are the most simplistic, like the softer parts of What We Loved and Little Ones Run, really are my favorite aspects of this song, of this album. It's that heavy use of distortion in some parts, that white noise guitar we explained, that I just takes a sour note for pieces. It can be a little abrasive. It's some of the mixing, as Steve has said, as we've mentioned, the volume gets to be a little bit too high on some instruments. Maybe they should have cut out a little bit here and there. But they're really, really good at making music. That's really what it comes down to in the end. They're really good. They're damn good. There's a lot of quality here. There's a lot of interesting ideas. We couldn't talk 6 tracks for 2 hours unless there was a lot to talk about. I was trying to come up with a metaphor. I was having a really hard time coming up with a metaphor.
I got a metaphor for you, but you'll have to wait until Matt's done.
My metaphor was, if this was turned into a physical object, if this was a physical art, it would be just gossamer and starlight. It would be gorgeous, but really hard to hold, hard to manipulate, because you look at it from the wrong way, or you approach it at the wrong angle, you'll destroy it. You will not get it. No possible way. That's a little bit of a negative, but it's also pretty positive because it also means you're going to think, I like that. I like smarts required. It's a 4. It's a really, really good album. I just wish it had more sectional skipping parts, maybe. That might have been the thing. Maybe the long 14-minute songs could have been separated movements.
You need TiVo with these songs.
It might have helped. It probably would help. Let's be frank. It probably would help.
All right. Well, I mean, we didn't all see eye to eye on the track-by-track breakdown, but I feel like we're all in the same range as far as the overall goes. I find that for me, this is a case of Paper Chase again, and I've mentioned them a few times today, because although I did enjoy this more than I enjoyed, finger quotes, Paper Chase, it wasn't as off-putting as Paper Chase was. But what I mean is, it's not particularly my taste. There are moments of my taste that really hook me throughout the record. But overall, there were a lot of moments where I was just like, well, if I wasn't drowning in distortion, I would probably enjoy this a lot more. It's not really a record that I think I would go back to. That said, distortion and all, and possible flaws in production, the talent is undeniable. Especially their drummer, for me, is where I really focused. Their drummer and the female singers really were some of the most highlighted moments for me. And there's enough of a smattering of that throughout the entire album to keep me engaged and to keep me going. But, I mean, hands down, as far as beauty goes, track 4, Little Ones Run, is just, it's a gorgeous, heart-wrenching song that I, if I don't recommend the whole record, I would definitely recommend that song for sure. You know, there's a talent. John was looking for metaphor before, and I kind of just, I feel this album is very poignant, yet pointless. And what I mean by that is, there are so many important points that I think are really relevant to the future of music as a whole. Overall, the album, in an education and an exercise, has moments of pointlessness. It just, because the lyrics kind of fall off, or the singing kind of tapers off, or the execution of some of the songs kind of falls short. And that's what's really going to hurt it for me. But that said, I mean, they still clearly have probably more talent in their elbow than some of the entire albums and bands we've reviewed before on this show. So I think I'm in the exact same place for John. I think that it's a 4. I don't know that I'd go back and listen to it that much, but there are definitely moments that I would like to keep and pluck and listen to again. And definitely track 4 will be something that I would probably go back to and listen, because it was absolutely beautiful.
Well, working with long forms is a very tricky thing. And I hate being the stickler in this area, because I think patience should be encouraged in music, as opposed to baiting jackdaws with shiny things. But there's a spectrum here, same with everything. In every spectrum, there are extremes. Too hot, too cold. Well, here it's too fleeting, too lengthy. And temperature isn't just the perfect analogy because it's another spectrum. You've got Goldilocks ranges within that compare just as well. Between certain degrees of temperature, you can actually live. And only in a certain time frame can a song be both perceptible to the human ear and be over before you have to get to bed, eat, sleep, work, whatever. Our lives are finite, our art has to be too. But let's be kind. I love living in New York City. Why? Because amongst other reasons, even in the years it might not seem it, this one, we get 4 seasons. I love feeling the weather ebb and flow on a primal level. It's invigorating. I could never live in a place with a year-round 70 degrees. I know people who could, but that's just not me. I favor the cold weather, often the really cold weather, because that's when I feel inspired, I feel motivated, because I think there's a certain majesty in the stillness, a painting in every snowfall, whatever. So there's something compelling about the ass-end extremes of life. And now that my analogy is apparent, I know that this is a long way to go just to defend a song just because it's over 10 minutes. But I make this plea to all listeners who want to expand their horizons, because for many, true immersion is an unplucked fruit waiting to be savored. Unless it has worms in it. It's a 4-2.
4-2, okay.
No, it's a 4 as
well.
well.
4 as well.
No, because you usually throw in random
points, so...
I wouldn't be surprised if we one day get a 3.3 with a line over it from you. As in a literal 1/3.
I confess to having considered it.
Okay, so 4 across the board. We haven't actually been in that way for a while. I mean...
But yeah, when I say there
get close.
worms in this unplucked fruit, it's really kind of on a it's on a taste by taste basis.
Absolutely.
I do think that these guys are pros, absolute pros at the long form compositional process, and I think that it's just tough. It's really, really tough to compose something so unified front to back. And I think the album in itself really is unified. I think it's just certain sections that could have used some variety. Where they choose to sit and stay for a while is kind of up to them, and it goes back and forth in me. There have been moments in this album where I loved it. I said, bring it on, give me more of it. And there have been moments where I'm like, all right, come on, next thing.
I think in the long run, it's actually very easy for me to sum up this. This is definitely a listen to it. I don't know that I recommend running out to buy it, but I think everyone who listens to wide varieties of music would find something they might like here, because there's a little bit of many different things here. So I think it's definitely worth giving it a listen. Find it on Spotify and check it out. It's funny, we try and link our topics to our album reviews as much as possible, but actually this is one of the first topics that came up kind of by accident pre-show.
You know what it relates to? It relates to my intro.
Yes.
Monday.
Yeah, so...
Storm stumbled over this one.
So...
Literally.
We were talking about Happy Birthday and how you can't... Because it's Steve's birthday. You can't actually sing Happy Birthday on air without paying the person who actually wrote Happy Birthday. That's why Applebee's restaurants or the like...
They do the clapping.
They do varieties in the song and the rhythm.
From me.
Just so it can fall under the realm of a cover.
Yes, exactly. And so, looking at that, it really brought up the kind of thing we'd want to talk about with public domain and copyright infringement and all of that kind of stuff. How the idea that stuff like Beethoven, anyone can sample and use because it's public domain. It's been around so long, no one owns the rights to it. Where something like Happy Birthday, where clearly it's not public domain, you could
Which
get...
is bizarre, because you'd think that's something that's the definition of public domain. I mean, it's ubiquitous. That is completely ubiquitous. Everyone knows it. Which is why it's bizarre that I learned only today from yours truly that it really was only utilized as a Happy Birthday song in about 1935, which is about 10 years after the date where
everything previous was
public domain.
Precisely.
And it's just kind of interesting that if you want that, well, I mean, that's probably why, like with even the Beatles, when they made their song Happy Birthday, it had to be different. It couldn't be
birthday.
Yeah, because they didn't want to have to pay for it.
Although we did discover the origin of the song, and that it was originally a teacher's song to like a kindergarten class, which was "Good morning to you, good morning to you, good morning to you, good morning, dear children, good morning to you," and that was actually what it was written in back in like 1898. So if you sing that, then you're under public domain.
Yes.
Kind of weird.
The interesting thing about public domain and copyright, though, is, I mean, a lot of artists, you know, it doesn't stop them if they want to do a cover or sample something. They'll pay whoever has to get paid to get the rights to it. I had a run-in with an artist who actually did something unique with his sampling. So Adam Warrock is someone I've mentioned on the podcast a few times. Recently released a Doctor Who themed EP where he did 8 songs, 8 raps, if you will, about Doctor Who. One of the songs, called Guess Who, one of the remixes, he actually features the Doctor Who theme. But because the whole EP was free, there was no worry of rights or sampling, because he released that, like a lot of other songs that he sampled, for free on the internet, so you can get it, listen to it, his art's getting out there, but he doesn't have to pay anything because he's not charging anything.
That is one way to get around the whole idea of copywritten material and everything like that. It is the easiest, not the easiest, it is the safest way. Don't charge any money. Make sure that it actually is free.
Yeah.
And you won't have to worry about a lot of the issues that occur with infringement. But I got a question, and this is just to really kick off the topic. How do you actually enforce copyrights? How do you actually enforce private domain? Because once somebody has read a book, has listened to a song, they know it. Once they've seen a movie, they've experienced it. And while upon repetition, a movie or a book or a television show will become more familiar, and by that point they would be able to remember it like that, a song is purposely done, in a lot of cases, in most cases, to be concise, short, and memorable. An artist who makes a song, a 2-minute, 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute song, once he makes it and he shares it with the world, it ain't his anymore. That's what it really boils down to, because anybody who hears it, anybody who, if they can play the guitar, they can make that song. If they can sing or hum,
well, John is right on one token. That is, like, ideally in any artist's world, if he gets to the point where his song really is being sung by everyone and their mother, that's a success story.
Right.
Even if it doesn't make him money.
But the difference is those are covers. Even if you
No. I'm not saying people are actually producing music.
Okay.
I'm saying you heard a song today. You can hum along to it. It's not that guy's song anymore. It's your song. It's part of your memories. It's part of you.
Sure.
You can't take
but
that away.
You can't take that away.
Correct.
So what's the point of copyrights?
Because copyright is different. It's sales and money and losses. It's a difference. It has nothing to do with singing or recreating the song in your own image. It has everything to do with financial gain. Copyright is about, I released this album on CD, back when CD was the main form, let's say about a decade ago, or a little less. That is now something created by the artist. The artist owns it and is selling it. When someone tries to sell the same thing under their own name and not credit the other artist, they are stealing their intellectual property. That's the difference. If I'm just walking around singing their song, you're right, it's become part of my life, it's my emotion, it's my attachment. But I'm not selling it, I'm just singing it.
Well, see, I follow you, but I also follow the absurdity of the whole affair that John is really pointing out here, because this whole thing reminds me, in fact, of a very old Simpsons joke from early seasons, where Grandpa, in order to impress one of the, I believe it was in order to impress Marge's mother, took 2 potatoes, stuck the forks in them, as of the old bit Charlie Chaplin, and starts making the potatoes dance on the table. And then out of nowhere, a little bit of old sketch material for old Simpsons, the copyright police come along and say, "Sir, you are infringing on the estate of Charlie Chaplin. Please cease and desist." And they take the potatoes and they throw them on the floor and they smash them. Yeah. And later in the same exact episode, his heart is broken. He has a trench coat on. He's walking away and he says some quote clearly from an old movie, and they come by again. "Sir, you are infringing on the estate of Jimmy Stewart." And they take his coat off. That's how ridiculous it is. There's no, the whole reason they would parody that is because there really is no copyright police. Unless you happen to be really in the wrong place at the wrong time, no one can possibly come after you for doing something so benign that doesn't really harm the person who created it, that isn't detracting homage from that person. It's simply reenacting it in your memory, which, as I said before, is a success story.
And not all of copyright law actually is just about the money. You can get in trouble for using intellectual properties without a financial component being involved here. And that's where things start getting really ridiculous. Because in a lot of cases, they're actually done because the person loves the artist so much. And then they're told, no, you can't do this. You cannot express your desire to propagate this love for it.
Well, yes and no. It becomes less about, yes, you're right. It can happen without money. It becomes a matter of infringement and damages. I mean, the reality is, if I start singing one of Adam Warrock's songs all the time because I love it, he's not going to run after me with a piece of paper in his hand trying to sue me. It comes down to where these things are being used and how they're being used. The idea that we're putting out a podcast, even though it's free, we can't sing that song because we don't own it. And if she had decided to go after someone, which I've heard, I think she does, she can get her money because we used it without her consent, without paying her anything, without giving her anything. And that's what it comes down to. It's mostly pure judgment.
But then, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? You're at a rally of some sort or another. Save whales or drill. Doesn't really matter. But you play a song on a boombox. Is that copyright infringement? No. Why not?
Because it's not recorded anywhere. You're playing the actual artist's work.
No. That's the whole thing. But you're using it in a forum that the artist may or may not actually agree with.
But that's irrelevant.
But an artist.
But that has nothing to do with copyright.
No, but under copyright law, you can actually sue for damages if you're, say, super liberal. And
that has nothing to do with copyright. That has to do with damages of a personal persona. That's separate.
Part of intellectual property.
Yes, which is on all intellectual property disputes don't have to do with copyright.
But that's what I'm talking about here. Intellectual property law gets ridiculous.
Yes.
And it's really ridiculous.
But that's not what we were just talking about. We were just talking about copyright.
Well, just to play moderator here, because I'm loving this, that you two are going at it finally. There's a thing that is just bizarre about artists in general. And I think the whole reason these laws exist is because there's no way to quantify what an artist is actually doing. There's no way to quantify his product. A service is really easy to quantify. A service such as in the science field, in the math field, and just about anything vocational, very, very, very easy to quantify. You've done a service, you get paid for it. But service is very ambiguous when you're talking about something about the arts, because it's all about who's going to like it, who's going to love it. It's just, who are you getting your money from? Those people specifically? That's the way the ideal world should work, but that's not the way it works, because you can't always reach those people individually. I mean, there's a line there between whether it's a job or begging. And I think this is the whole reason it came about. That's why it's only really come about in the past 100+ years.
Well, also the difference is, like any other law or rule, it's created with good intent to protect those who deserve to be protected. However, then it gets bent, changed, or worked around depending on who the person is. Like the idea that Lars Ulrich attacked Napster and for the theft of music, which in its basis form makes sense. If an artist who doesn't really have any other way to make money other than selling his music is then being stolen for free, it's a problem. The reason a lot of the community got upset with Lars Ulrich and Metallica was because he was an artist who was fairly well off at the time. So if some people are stealing his music, who cares? But on the flip side, yes. If an artist who isn't super famous, is trying to get by paycheck to paycheck, is still working a day job of recording music, and someone's stealing their music on the internet, it really hurts them because every dollar matters. And so it's a fine line between.
It's also, like, a good example is Michael Jackson, before he passed, owned the rights to the Beatles' music. Technically, he could have forbid Paul McCartney from playing the songs he wrote.
Which would have been
in a public forum.
pretty dick move.
Which is if completely legal and
actually
technically makes
you can't ban people from covering in a live show. You can't. You can ban if he wanted to re-record the Beatles music on his own.
Okay,
Michael could have banned him.
So Paul McCartney can't make
worse.
Beatles
Yes.
songs.
It's worse, yes.
How is that not ass backwards?
Well,
To be frank, how is that not backwards?
it is, but like I said,
He makes a point, Charlie.
right, again, with infringement and laws like that, it really comes down to the execution and the ridiculousness of the situation. But that's a unique situation.
And no, that's the whole thing is intellectual property when it comes to things like the more artistic fields starts infringing upon the freedom of speech and a lot of stuff like that. Because I'm not one for taking My Little Ponies and turn them into Satanist dolls or something like that. That's stupid. But Hasbro can forbid somebody from doing something like that very easily.
Yeah.
Why? It's people are allowed to do that sort of thing. That's where you start breaching. I can see slander, and that's basically the extent of it.
But that's exactly, I think, it, especially with something like that.
Why would it be slanderous?
I think,
That's
yeah,
where
again,
a lot
I
of the
think it
questions
goes back-
become. Why would it actually be slanderous? Because otherwise, you're actually just
But
infringing
slanderous is a
upon
harsh term.
amendments
I don't
at this
think
point.
slanderous would necessarily be included in any.
Well, no,
in
that's
any
one of the main-
lawsuit.
But that's one of the main. Actually, it's used
Well,
a lot.
actually,
but
yeah,
that's one of
I
the
take
main
that back.
reasons why. That's one of the main rules that actually circumvents freedom of speech.
I mean, I do believe that a lot of it is money grabs.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I
what
don't.
we-
I think that's
what we
what it
lead
is
to
at
anyway.
its core.
Yes, but I have an example of where it's not a money grab and it's just wanting to protect your art from being destroyed by crappy musicians. And that's the flip side. Everyone knows the story of Vanilla Ice. And when he wrote Ice Ice Baby, he claimed that the beat was different from
Under Pressure.
Under Pressure, thank you.
By Queen.
By Queen. And then when you play them back to back, he's absolutely nuts because they're identical.
So?
So Queen felt, well, here's this terrible artist ruining something that's important to us. But the problem was though Queen didn't want to fight. Queen just said, you sampled us, pay us our money, and we're done. And it was Vanilla Ice who stupidly made a stink and said, no, it's different, man. This is mine. I wrote this. Oh, well, in that case, you wrote this, now we're going to court. Which I think is fair. When someone else is claiming on creating something that's clearly not theirs, it's fair to want to protect what you made, because you made it.
That would probably fall underneath slander. But had he actually said, yes, I sampled from you, and I'm using it in my song, and no, I'm not paying you, then I would actually be kind of okay with it.
I want to just propose,
Because-
though. I
wait,
think
wait,
we
wait.
are. Just really quick, because I think that most of us know that it was probably a sample. At the same time, do we have it written down anywhere? Did he ever come out and finally say it was a sample? Because theoretically,
I don't think so.
something so simple as dun 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 dun. Who's to say that can't be replicated individually? It's kind of a no-brainer, almost.
It is, but they put it side by side and they sounded very similar, but the idea is also...
But
As they
that's
could,
the whole thing.
as they easy as.
And you said point blank that it was a great artist being ripped on by a terrible artist. Well, I'm sure there's people out there, both of them, who like Vanilla Ice better than Queen, and those two people out there will say no, he took a terrible thing and made it good.
But
so you're there. You go. There's
But
your
that
argument.
No, we're
wasn't
not
my
entering
argument.
the
You're
realm of
completely ignoring my
public
actual
defense.
point. Was that the reason Queen fought was because he fought.
No, the first thing was pay us. You sampled us.
Right.
They should not have been able to say pay us. You sampled. No.
I disagree.
Then why make art to begin with if you don't want people to follow your footsteps?
That's not the same thing.
Well, there's one point in being unique, but if you're going to produce something, you have to know that once everybody has seen it, anybody has seen it, it is no longer yours. That's my point. Once you've actually shown your idea to somebody else, it is no longer your idea. You've given them part ownership in that idea.
Again, just from a history standpoint, I think a lot of this has to do... I mean, I don't know why officials would have any interest in this, but just to keep artists from falling under that starving artist stereotype, which kind of is the way it was for hundreds and hundreds of years.
It still is now in places.
Is kind of now, but there are a lot of defenses, and sometimes, yes, they go a little bit too far. I do think that red tape is a little bit extreme these days, but then again, when you do stack that up against, a time when there was just no law whatsoever, when you couldn't... It would be very difficult to prove unless you had all of your papers in their right order and kept them on your person at all times. It's just... It was impossible.
Well, the reality is there's an extreme on both ends, and finding a middle ground, especially when it comes to bureaucracy, is very difficult. I mean, that's really where this lies.
Well, don't let me diffuse your argument.
You're not diffusing my argument, but the thing is, John's taking it to extreme A instead of leaning more towards middle. What's the point of creating art if you can't? You're taking it. You're ignoring the gray area.
Let's talk about perception also, because there are artists who care and there are artists who don't. I think there are artists who feel exactly like John said, which is, of course, art is for everyone. What do I care if my work is getting played? It's what I said in the beginning. That is an homage to me as an artist. If my work is getting played by anyone,
and that's the difference. If the art is better.
But
for the masses, it will be recognized as such.
But what it comes down to is the artist, not the art. That's what it really comes down to. The fact of the matter is, when I was at the show last Sunday, and Adam Warrock said, I have this new record out. It costs $10 on the internet, but you know what? If you got it by downloading it, great. I'm just glad you're listening to it. It's proof that he cares more about his art than the money. And that's fine. But again, that's the artist. It has little to say about the law or the rule. That has little to do with it, because it ultimately boils down to how the artist treats it. Because copyright law and copyright infringement comes down to the artist pursuing it. If there's a song out in the world that's an exact ripoff of something else, if the artist never pursues it, it's moot. It doesn't matter. And honestly, more often,
everything
honestly,
you hear about is when artists made a big
thing.
But
and also, it's not always up to the artist, because not all artists own their music. Sometimes the recording company does.
That's what that actually infuriates me.
And that's what it comes down to on the bigger scale. Is if, say, Sony owns artist A, and artist A is covered, artist A may not care, but Sony, who helped put out and put money in it, will go, well, we care. It's our money. So we're going to chase this person down and pursue them. And that's where a lot of the complication really happens, I think.
I think I'm more of a Darwinism when it comes to art. If the art's good enough, if it really is quality pieces, and you charge for it, people will spend money. I do that. If I like music enough, I find it on Slacker, Pandora, what have you. I find it on YouTube. I find it actually good enough, I buy the music.
I see where you're going.
I support people who make good art.
I see why you use the term Darwinism in terms of like national selection. Only the best, will rise to the top, but a more simplified version of it is capitalism. I mean, that's essentially it. A true capitalist way of life would be, well, no protection. Go for it. Just completely go for it. If you've got the chops, then you will get to the top. It's not always true. In fact, it's in this particular area where I do sometimes recede and say it's not entirely perfect, because yes, crime can occur, and there are very unsavory people in the world, and people who will, I'd say, steal your art and then make exorbitant amounts of money on it without owing any homage to you whatsoever, and I do believe that's wrong.
Yes. I mean, also the reality of it is, I think on the whole, is if you create art, you want it to be spread and shared, and how that happens can vary on a case-by-case basis. And ultimately, you want it out there. Me, personally, I feel like I'm the only person on the planet who buys CDs, because I like what comes with the CD. The disc, the art, the graphic, everything.
That new CD smell.
That too.
Oh, God.
But the reality is, I think the reason I don't like pirating music is this. Because the people who pirate music and only pirate music and never buy any are the type of people, I feel, and I'm generalizing a bit, who also expect everything. and don't feel like they earn anything. You know,
That's probably true.
they just take what they want regardless of repercussions, and that's why those laws are in place. For the person like that who feels like he's entitled to everything without giving anything, that's ultimately who those rules were to deter and protect. But as any other law or rule, they get bent and warped by the internet age.
Well, here's the thing, though. On the whole, I agree with you, but I have a little bit of kind of a major point with that regarding the torrenting era, and this is why I'm really, really glad that the Spotify era is sort of a new thing right now, where actually you do kind of have access to whole albums for free, and it's a massive library. I mean, there's no reason not to indulge in this.
It's not illegally
illegal at all.
downloading them.
Yeah.
It's legally downloading them.
Yeah.
Yeah, if downloading them at all. I mean, everyone is most people have a hardwired connection to the internet, so it's really not that big deal to stream it these days either. But just looking at the last 15 years, the era of downloading music, beginning with Napster, moving on through Kazaa and LimeWire, and then ultimately to the torrents, all these illegal ways of obtaining music. Yes, it's wrong, and I think all of your points are valid. That probably is indicative of a kind of person who thinks that they're not entitled. I mean, that they are entitled to everything and they don't owe anything. At the same point, though, there are people who use it as a means to an end. People who use it just so they can get the knowledge, because otherwise they'd have no sources. This is the thing. We've talked about sources of media before. Radio doesn't always do that great a job.
No.
Media doesn't always do that great a job. Your peers don't always do that great a job. I mean, I could think of plenty of peers who I would never borrow any music taste from whatsoever. So sometimes you just need to do your own research, and at least in the upbringing perspective, when you're going through puberty and you don't really have the money to be throwing around on album to album to album, I think I am going to make the claim that, as wrong as it is, the side effect of the last 15 years of torrenting has been a younger generation that is much more cultured than the previous.
I will give credit to that, but again, I'm talking about the very extreme example of the person who never spends money on art.
Of
ever.
course.
And I feel like that's just
And I
unfair.
believe the idea is that, once you get over that hump, once you're making money now, then why, if you really care, if you're really passionate about the music, throw money toward the artist. You get it in a nice little box, you put it in your shelf, it's beautiful.
Or at least you can download it digitally from anywhere in the world for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
There's that too.
Yeah, which is a nice addition
That's
from
worth
the
a
Amazon
buck. That's
and
worth a buck.
the Amazon
It
and
kinda
iTunes
is.
generation. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, but I still don't demonize torrenting to the same extent that many others do.
Of course, and I agree.
Because they would go out there and take the John stance, as he just put forth, that art is for everyone. That is the personal philosophy of many torrenters out there.
And
people who started the websites themselves.
And I fight that to a point, because it's just, if someone's getting by based on that download and you pluck it from them, that's a problem. It really is. And it's a level of extremes, and finding middle ground, I think, is ultimately where we get with this at the end, is finding that dreamy middle ground that'll probably not ever happen.
I think what we should really do is take all of the artists in the world and throw them on the Galapagos Islands and see what happens.
And
Just
see
see
if
what happens.
Darwinism takes its effect.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think
Thanks
that might
for
work.
that, John. Nice to end on such an intellectual note. Steve,
What?
please save
Well,
us and take
well-
us into your spam of this
Excuse me.
week, please.
Save you by taking you into a spam? I may never hear you say those words again.
Probably not. I'm very desperate. Before we wrap up, please.
Those poor turtles.
Good day. This is kind of off topic, but I need some guidance from an established blog. We're established. Is it very difficult to set your own blog? I'm not very technical, but I can figure things out pretty fast. I'm thinking of setting up my own, but I'm not sure where to start. Do you have any tips, suggestions? Thank you.
Who's it from?
That is from Personal Loan Bank. We can advise banks. We can advise bank personnel on how to be not so boring.
I think that my first level of advice would be to take all those home mortgages that are obviously not getting paid and just forget about them. I think that's step one. I think that's a good starting point. I think step two would be to give back all the money that they stole from the rest of the people, I think step 3.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Going
we're
in a
moving on.
political
I'm
route
going all
here.
that way.
And John's time to talk is over. So next week we
For the
actually
second time, you're done.
F the man. Or whoever.
we get
the
it,
man
John.
would
You
be.
hate the government. It's
I don't
fine.
hate the
Moving
government.
on.
Sigh.
I'm
So
disappointed.
next week we have a guest. We're bringing in another Wasties solo. Sarah Biz is going to join us. She's going to bring her guitar and play some songs, and she's also bringing us an album that's kind of out of left field. Someone who I'd forgotten has actually been doing legitimate folk music for a while now. Steve Martin's banjo record, folk banjo record, featuring Edie Brickell, I believe is how the name is pronounced, a female vocalist who sings with either sings with him or is the lead singer on the record. The album is called Love Has Come For You, and this is the record she's going to bring us to us next week. She's going to play some songs as well.
And you said this is Grammy level?
Yes, he won a Grammy for one of the songs on the album, I believe.
Steve Martin.
Yeah.
Steve Martin. I think
See,
that might be his
it's-
only.
it's
that might be
hilarious.
his only Grammy.
It's hilarious to
Oh
me.
my-
It's hilarious to me how blown away Steve is by this, because Steve Martin's been playing highly regarded banjo music for a decade, at least. But be that as it may, we'll get into this. I haven't actually heard any of his previous records, but this is the newest one, so we will check this out. I will hopefully know by next week which track he actually won the Grammy for. On that note, though, we will wrap up and see you next week. And remember, as always, music is life, and life is good.
It's so damn good.